I'm going to turn off our little background music here. Was keeping us in this vibe.
I was
We're
really
vibing,
enjoying that background music. That was special. Thanks
right?
for getting that going. Yeah.
No problem. It's always helpful. Get us started. So welcome, Eric, and I look forward to our conversation. I think, I want to thank you for taking the time from your London abode. So you are across the pond. So welcome. What time is it there? It's
I
3 o'clock.
am. Yes, it's just about 3 o'clock here in London. So we're in a really interesting week this week because our daylight saving times are off by a couple of weeks. So we flipped our clocks fall ahead 2 weeks ago. So for about 2 weeks, we've been only 4 hours different. And I think this weekend in the States,
We're
you
going
guys are
back.
clocks ahead. And then we'll be back to that 5 hour difference. So it's late in the afternoon. We got about another hour and a half of sunshine left, if you can call it sunshine. But yeah, it's been a lovely 55 and rainy for the last couple of weeks, which is, if you like 55 and rainy, this is the place to be.
Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome. So tell me a little bit about what you've done in the past. I mean, of course, I know, but let's tell the audience a little bit about what you've done in the past, your experience, and what we're going to chat about today.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Melissa. First of all, thank you, and thank you, Orca Intelligence, for inviting me on. And it's great to catch up. You and I know each other from several years back, where we our paths crossed for a few years while we were working together at Comcast. But
Yeah.
my background has been around search and search engines for a number of years, and I'm super excited because about a year ago, this AI, even though we've been working with AI and machine learning for quite a few years, even together when we were working at Comcast, something changed fundamentally in the marketplace. This little thing called Chat GPT came out just about a year ago today, and it's really changed the way we have conversations about search and interacting with customer data and thinking about new ways to create engagement. And so today we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about AI and the impact of the business, and just understanding some of the key fundamentals that organizations need to think about as they endeavor into large language models and AI.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Thank you for that. And I like to bring people and talk to people whose background is really impressive and who can flow and have an honest conversation. So I appreciate you being here to do that because I really just like us having a conversation. And I'm always like, well, why don't we just do a LinkedIn Live on it? Right. So I think this will be fun. So the first thing, do you want to ask me first or you want me to go first?
Yeah, let me. I had a question for you.
Okay,
You mind
cool.
if I start?
Yes.
So we can talk about the technology a lot, and it's super interesting. I think a lot of people are starting to play with it. But Melissa, from where you're sitting in
Mhm.
market intelligence and the role that you've taken, what are you seeing as the key business drivers for artificial intelligence and AI in the marketplace today?
Yeah, well, initially FOMO, the fear of missing out. That's I think is the initial business driver now, right? There's that, and then because there's a lot of like CIOs and chief data officers who are coming up. They're like, we got to get to it. Let's hire an AI engineer. Let's hire this and that. Which really you just hire a data scientist, but whatever, right? And so I think that that's initially the first business case that I've seen recently. But it depends on also the agency, because some agencies have had agencies and corporations, because some agencies have had their chief data officers for a while, or they have their chief AI officer for a while. So they've had it before ChatGPT has come out. But now you're just starting to see them pop up because of, where ChatGPT has kind of gotten everybody thinking a little bit more creatively. And so I've seen it where a lot of the drivers are primarily just they don't want to miss out on the evolution. They want to see how can they integrate it. And some organizations are just aligning and integrating with the ChatGPT API, which is okay. It depends on the organization, right? But there's so many things that I think that the organizations should think about before just taking on ChatGPT. Like, is ChatGPT right for you? Like, I know I'm not sure whether or not NIH has done this for their. I think it's their grant management system. It's one of their modules. They have it on their strategic plan where they are looking at using the review process. That's what it is. So the review process, they're looking at using AI part of their review process to speed that process up. I'm not sure. I don't think they're using ChatGPT. They're probably using an open AI model for it. So that was one of the drivers. The other thing that I've seen is, at least in the government space, is looking at it from a fraud perspective, so a risk management and fraud perspective, and being able to say, okay, well, we need to have some type of capability that's going to allow us to find fraudulent activities a lot faster than, interacting with a human. But still, it's assistive, right? It's not like totally taking over the job. It's still assistive technology.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think what's really interesting about this particular wave is just as you mentioned, right? The chief data officer, the CIO, the CTO, a lot of this innovation, a lot of this adoption is now being driven top down. There's pressure,
Yes.
external pressure from boards, from directors, from
Yep.
investors, saying, what is your strategy around large language models? And how are you going to adopt it? And why aren't you getting there fast enough? Which creates a lot of unnecessary pressure, which is almost entirely different from how we saw cloud adoption or even mobile adoption, where you saw, this solved a problem for engineering teams, and it solved a problem for technology teams, because it allowed them to shift their expertise into areas that they could really focus on. Versus, this LLM, it creates a whole set of new questions for technology teams.
I agree. Now I want to throw this question out there. I know this isn't a part of it, but what do you think about what are some of the skill sets? And do you think, I'm going to add this to it, but do you think that instead of organizations looking at large language models, should they look at doing a small language model first to get their feet wet, and then incrementally building from there? So it's two sets, skill sets. So if you're trying to get into AI and you're trying to help these organizations be strategic, what are some of the skill sets? But then also, based on that, do you think large language models are what organizations need to look at, or should they start a little bit smaller with a small language model?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think it's the right one to be asking as customers and various organizations try to get their head around their strategies for AI. First and foremost, taking a step back and looking at the skill sets. As you mentioned just a few minutes ago, the data scientist plays a key role in executing, either building machine learning models or building large language models or whatever sort of AI. Data science continues to play an incredible role in helping evaluate and align those various AI models and tune them into your use cases. But the thing that you mentioned as you started talking about the NIH and you started talking about various government agencies is that there's still a clear business driver that has to drive the utility of these tools. But before we get into sort of those drivers and talk a bit more about that, let's just take a step back and see how the skill sets and the roles can actually evolve. And so you'll have some traditional roles that we've been familiar with in both in the customers we work with, the companies we work with, and then there's some new roles that are really emerging that I think organizations need to take a hard look at. So data science will continue to play a key role in evaluating and understanding how these AI models play. The data engineer is critical, right? So having clean data, having high quality data, having data that you can rely on, that's consistent and has good governance and has good provenance and policies that are understood about your data, how to use your data, is also incredibly important. Because it doesn't, it's not a magic bullet, right? It's still the same old garbage in, garbage out problem. And if you throw just random, unfiltered, dirty washed data at these large language models, guess what? You're going to get back, right? You're going to get sort of bad results. So data engineering and software developers are critical roles. But what's new to the mix that we haven't seen in traditional product teams or project teams is you now really need to take on the whole notion of ethics and policies, right? So what are as an organization, what are my ethics? What are my privacy policies? What as an industry, what do I have to be compliant with? And how do I make sure that I'm compliant with the various rules and regulations that control my industry and in my location.
Mhm.
And then finally, there's a new emerging role that's really becoming a specialist, and this is this area of what's called prompt engineering. And prompt engineering is where we're seeing now an opportunity to bring communication experts into your
Mhm.
product team, or a linguist into your product team, or a historian, someone that can sit down and describe things in words, in language that we understand. Because guess what? That's how the large language model interacts, right? And so this now creates an opportunity for you to bring even more dimensionality into your product team, right, to help build out a better experience for your customers.
Yeah.
So those are the roles and responsibilities. Now the question about large language models, whether you should use large or small, and those are fabulous questions. The large language model is wonderful because it's sort of a one size fits all, right?
Mhm.
But it's hanging a picture with a sledgehammer, right? It can
Yep.
be expensive. You have to know what you're getting into. It can solve a
Yep.
lot of problems. And the nice thing about a smaller language model is that you can use it for more fine-tuned, more fine-grained use cases along the way. So the short answer is, right, it depends. But I think this is where you work with your product teams and your data scientists and your engineers and your business people and your these communication experts, these people that are great at telling stories, to really sort of figure out what is that workflow that you want to build. What are the business drivers? Because we have to align to business drivers, and then you can figure out which models will align with what you need to use.
Mhm. Such a great point. Yes, exactly. And I get excited about hearing about like all of the different, um, well, they're like existing careers, but now integrating them with technology. Because I've always been a proponent of that, especially like even from an ethical standpoint. Like, so I read something the other day, and they talked about having a sociologist involved, right? So having a sociologist involved in artificial intelligence, and then you're bringing up a linguist, right? Like all of this, having a historian, even from a quality assurance standpoint, like having someone there from these different areas and industries to be able to validate the information, right? So the one question that I really want to get into, so I'm going to speed this up. I know we're supposed to probably hold on to this question a little bit, but like the hallucination, right? The counting of hallucinations in artificial intelligence. So you brought this word to me just recently, and I had no, like, I was like, I never like put context around it, but in terms of like looking at it and digging into it deeper, it just makes so much sense because we are experiencing that as a society, I think. And so, talk a little bit more about that and what you're thinking along those lines and how we can counter the hallucinations.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point, and I think it's one of the barriers for entry. And I think understanding the word hallucination is really about taking a minute to step back and really sort of understanding what a large language model is, right? And effectively, if you boil it down, there's definitely a hype cycle, right? People are, oh my God, the AI is going to get out of the box, or we're going to have this Terminator event where these robots are going to be walking down the street and something horrible is going to happen, right? And but the reality is right, the large language models, at least the way they are today, it doesn't mean that they won't evolve in the next short few years, but the way they are today is really just a predictive model, right? So you give it a set of words, right? You say, I love what, and what's the next word that comes after that, right? And 80% of people say, well, I love you, and so the word you comes back, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, this robot tells me it loves me. And actually, no, it doesn't really love you. It doesn't really have empathy. It doesn't have emotions.
Really, Eric? That's so mean.
Yeah, it loves all of us, right? But it's really just looking at, and now it's been trained with billions of pieces of context, of text.
Yeah.
So billions of documents, and these come from all over the internet, question and answer systems and blogs and software and code. And so it's really good at predicting what's going to come next because it's seen these examples over and over and over again. And so it's really convincing when it gives you an answer. And so this is what we call hallucination. It gives an answer. It's so confident, and it's actually quite kind at how it puts words together because it's kind of picking the words that it sees people react to most positively, and it's got that like ChatGPT, for example, it's got that reinforcement learning. So it's from human feedback, which is now saying like, let's we've taken this human feedback to improve this model, to improve the response, so it feels very human. And then we've taken away sort of the negative, angsty, angry things by default. But in general, it's kind and it's supportive, and it gives us good feedback. But it can make things up, right? So it can go off and say, oh yeah, the president of the United States is John F. Kennedy. President of the United States is Alfred E. Newman, and it's convincing. And you look at it and you say, well, that's amazing. I didn't even know that Alfred E. Newman was a person, but that he's actually the president of the United States. And so, in the short term, there have been a number of solutions that people have come up with to limit that hallucination. And one technique that's super popular right now, in fact, it's being talked about in lots of different places. When you, again, going back to like Bing, which is using, OpenAI behind the scenes, it's using this technique inside of its model to really control and ground the information that it gets back in factual data. And the way it does that is a technique called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. And you're seeing some of the popular tools, some frameworks implementing RAG. You're seeing a lot of the vendors. So Neo4j is a graph database. They're implementing an RAG system. MongoDB also has an RAG
I met the people from Neo4j. They're awesome. Anyway.
Yeah, they're fantastic. It's a great group of guys and gals that are there. They're amazing. I've been working pretty closely with them myself for the last couple of years. So the way that they're counteracting these hallucinations, they're going into our trusted data source. They're using techniques like search and even something like vector search. We'll talk about what vector search is in a minute. But we're going into our search engines and going into our databases, and we're getting good, trustworthy, reliable data. And then we're taking that data and then we're passing that to the large language models and say, listen, give me an answer, but only get your information from what's in this data that I'm giving you. Mm-hmm. But instead of making it up from what you've been trained on the internet, which we can't really control the sources of, and there's billions of them, we say, actually constrain it to this set of information that I'm going to give you right here. Mm-hmm. And that's effectively what RAG is all about. Mm-hmm. And I think
it's like a mutually exclusive data set, right? Like in the model.
It's a data set it's your enterprise data. It's your high quality data that you're going to build your experiences on top of. And this goes back to the point we made before. This is why it's super important to make sure you have really good, reliable data and data flows coming through your applications. So you're effectively creating a ground for the language model to say, listen, if I'm going to make a summary or make an assertion or make a statement about something, ground it in this data that I have. And also furthermore, we've started building solutions where we say, and when you make that assertion, when you make that statement, point back to the source of data that it came from so we can connect the dots. So if someone wants to dive deeper and challenge that sentence, you can see exactly where we got that data from.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I can spend a minute on vector search. So I've got a question from Mike on listening, which is great. Hi, Mike. How are you? Thanks for joining in.
Hello.
So could we use prompt engineering to lessen the hallucinations? Is the question that Mike asks. Is there a best practice for crafting prompts for specific use cases? And I think the answer is prompt engineering plays a significant role in how a RAG solution gets implemented. So it's a great shout out because when you get that data in, you use prompt engineering to say, hey, large language model, only use the data that I'm giving you. And that's in fact how you provide those instructions. But the prompt engineering in and of itself isn't sufficient because the data that goes into the large language model, it loses its references, right? It's gone into this big training set. And when you ask it, it can't reproduce where it actually got the data from. So prompt engineering is not good enough. You need to combine these two techniques together in order to reduce those hallucinations.
Yeah, because prompt engineering is only going to give you, like what you said, just the text for you to write in or type in or say or speak in order to get some type of feedback back. Usually the prompt is going to be something that's an action verb that's going to get the system to do something specifically to search something, to discover something, to find something that you want, but it's not necessarily going to alter the reality for you, basically.
Yeah, it doesn't ground the underlying truth. Now, the prompts, you can do a lot with prompts. You can tell it, listen, here's a template that I want you to use when you respond to something. You can tell it the format, you can tell it the tone. You can use prompts to say, listen, give me an answer from this really complicated scientific data, for example, and explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And guess what? It does that, right? You can use prompts to say, pretend you're Shakespeare and write this answer in iambic pentameter. Like, you can do that with prompt engineering and it gets it, right? But you can't use prompts alone to say, yeah, this is the source of truth for this.
Right.
So it's that really powerful combination. And this is where, right, this new role that I created is really sort of, how do we get expert? How do we become experts in prompt engineering? Who is that role in your team? It's not a software engineer anymore who's writing code.
Why not?
Their application anymore. Like, it's not limited to that. It could be your product.
Yeah, that's true.
It could be,
Yeah.
right? It could be someone. It could be an engineering manager.
Yeah.
Team. But it's a new role, right? It's a new function that you think about when you build these apps.
Yeah, but in my head, when I hear about prompt engineering and I think about the prompt engineers, I'm going to say this, and probably a prompt engineer is going to say something to me later, but but like, you can kind of take that to a place of making that artificial intelligence, because really prompt engineering is action verbs, right? It's like, that's what prompts are. They're just action verbs. It's like, oh, I want to, import this into the system, or I need to do something about, or I want to ask you a question about discovering, philosopher from 1892, right? So it's always an action verb that's going to be used. So you can kind of come up with a lot of that language over time, and then utilize it to figure out whether or not that particular language that you're using for those different prompts are, used in a certain frequency. Are they not used as frequent as others? Are they used for specific types of organizational, practices? Like, so you can start to use the metadata around those prompts to really identify, how they can be used going forward.
I'll be honest with you that prompt engineering, there's a bit of alchemy going on there. There's a bit of mystery, and sometimes it takes a little trial and error, but you have to be willing to explain things. So here's a really interesting story. One of my colleagues is experimenting with a capability in OpenAI called function calling. What function calling is effectively getting the large language model to talk to your enterprise APIs. So it takes a set of information, whether it comes from your grounded information or its own predictive analysis, and then converts it into a procedural call that can be then used to connect to like a database, or speak Cypher to talk to Neo4j, for example, or talk to a SQL database, or even talk to your CRM system, right? Any sort of data that's sort of exposed through an API can be exposed through function calling. And one of the things that was really interesting is my colleague told me, he's like, listen, I've been experimenting with function calling, and one of the things I had to do with prompt engineering is I had to make the LLM act really dumb in order for the prompts to work, right? So I had to make it like stop being so flowery, stop giving such lovely expressions and descriptions of the words.
Yeah.
Dumb and rudimentary.
Yes.
Right. So it is action words, but it's also the behaviors you want, right? You can describe the sort of behavior you want it to embody through that prompt. So act like a dumb person and ask a really dumb question, exactly. And it'll give you better integration with your data systems, which is it's sort of telling in another way, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Well, so you were going to get into vectors. Please share more about vectors.
Yeah. So vector search is, and you asked a little bit before about, should we use large models or small models? Vector search is another emerging area in the technology space that we're seeing some good promise in. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I've been involved with search engines and enterprise search for quite some time. And one of the holy grails, if you will, of one of the things we always hear customers saying is, make my search like Google, right? And what is it about Google, right, that it makes it unique. And the thing about Google that I think that enterprises like and customers like with the search engine is that you can really ask a question in very simple, natural language. I can ask for, what was that movie with Tom Cruise, or tell me that song that's got that lyric, whatever, blah blah blah. Just to help us sort of remember. Like I remember that song, I remember that lyric in a music. I remember that this actor in a movie. Give me a Chinese restaurant in London, right? We were talking about food before we started, right? Give me a good place to eat, right? And so those are all natural language queries, right? And so what vector search is vector search allows us to now create a simple model, right? It allows us to map our content into what's called a vector or an embedding space. An embedding space is really just a mathematical representation of language. So it's a simple model. It's a much smaller model. It's really about encoding data into and out of that space is what it focuses on. But think about it as, you have this sort of graph in the 3 dimensions, and each of those locations refers to different concepts. So you have this notion of dogs and cats, right? Or you have this location of, or this notion of, lions and lambs, and they're all sort of animals, so they all sort of live in that vector space. But a house and a cat, or a dog and a cat, might be closer together in that vector space because they're house animals. Really? Where lions and lambs are sort of they're animals, but they're a bit further apart because one lives in Africa and one's used for clothing and for food. And then you have things like apples and oranges, right? So those are also concepts that are further away. They're food. They're a lot further away. So what the vector space is, it creates this organization and creates a mathematical model that allows you to put these terms into this three-dimensional, a multi-dimensional grid. It's sort of flattened out in 3D, if you will. So that's super interesting, Eric. But yeah, how do we use that? And so the way that works is that I can come in now and I can ask a question, which is a little bit more complicated in nature, saying something like, what's a good place to eat in London? And it knows that London is a location, and it knows that eat is a restaurant. So it can map those in, and suddenly it's able to go into my database of information, find all the restaurants, filter them out by a location, right? And it can do all that stuff behind the scenes for you. And there's no mapping of, identifying the fields and mapping it into a certain API function call or doing a filter. It understands that space and can naturally organize content into that space. So I bring content to my system, it organizes that into that mathematical model, and then when I ask questions, it also then maps that into that same model and looks at how close those things are together. So bottom line, it allows you to really ask natural language questions of your data in a way that we haven't really seen, or that a traditional search engine can fail when it's really trying to get a string of text to match.
Yeah. Would you say that the way that I visualize it is that it's graphing the metadata of an object or data, basically? Would you say that it's similar to that? Like you're taking information about
it goes one step further. So it's not just the metadata, right? The data about it, the data itself.
Yes. Yeah.
So it takes that content itself and then map it into that geographical space.
Right. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. And that's super powerful because then let's take an example, right? So let's say this is a recent example that I worked in with an academic publisher. I take something like academic literature, and then I can map the content of a given scientific article into a mathematical space. But then now I have metadata related to it. So I have an author, right, who's related to maybe a dozen or 50 papers over the period of time. And that author now is related to those 50 papers. And what I can do, because it's just a matrix, I can sum all those vectors together and create a single representation that now represents the author. So that means that I can use all the words that they've used and written in their papers and all the natural language and all the semantics that are related to that to then go discover that person or discover the institution they work for or the journal that they published in or their partners who are their peers. And I can now describe them. So it allows me to create a lot of context around very sparse data, right? If I'm searching for Melissa Daly, right, I only have those 2 words. And if I don't know your name, but I'm looking for, someone that can help me lead my organization through an AI digital transformation, right? I want to put those words in and then have a Melissa Daly come back and say, you know what, come work with Orca Intelligence because we're gonna that's how you're gonna have the best success, right?
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. Thank you for sharing that because I see you posted on LinkedIn and I'm just like, yes, we need to talk more about vectors and people have to understand like what that means and how it really translates for natural language processing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Got any more questions for me?
Super. Let's see. One more question. I think we talked a bit about. So we talked a little bit about aligning use cases with AI. Are there any other use cases that you wanted to think about or bring up that are really starting to drive the business forward for?
Yeah. So workforce development, I would say that. So in workforce development, there are cases where you want to look at a specific resume or you want to look at a specific person that may be applying for a position and matching them up with the right position. I've seen that a lot now, right? And especially helping those that are having a difficult time in their career who are trying to figure out, my skill sets are X, Y, and Z. What's the best career for me? Right? There's so much to pick from right now that a lot of people I think are getting overwhelmed with trying to make a decision about how can they move into the right career, whether that's AI or whether it's, building a business or whether it's being a school teacher. It's really trying to identify what are the right types of skill sets that you have as a person. And so I've seen a couple of technologies in the workforce space that is really taking in the information from an end user and then trying to analyze that information, providing them the right types of responses. And quite honestly, there's been a lot of workforce development systems that have not had the right types of matching criteria because they didn't have the right types of algorithms and infrastructure in place. They were pretty flat, right? So now I'm seeing a lot of organizations that's like, wait a second, like let's use AI for this so that we can match people up with the right careers. And I'm a big proponent of this because I've been saying this for weeks to people. The one thing that about the pandemic that I've been afraid of is not necessarily the pandemic itself, but it's usually like the socioeconomic differentiators that come with a pandemic, right? And then that increases crime, right? And that increases crime, And so what happens is that you need to now focus more on job development, career development, education, and so on and so forth. And so I think that's important to maybe use AI to help try to bridge those gaps around that.
Yeah, no, I love that use case. I think job, workforce development, recruiting, it's always been a very dodgy subject. And you get a lot of false positives, right? You get a lot of sort of people that come back for a role and say, well, yeah, no, that's not what I'm looking for. And I think you're right on. I think it gives us an opportunity both to help align use cases better with businesses and help align talent with businesses, but also to really help the workforce continue to reinvest and figure out what skills do I need to help move people along in their careers. It's really awesome.
Correct. Yeah, for sure. And of course, I'm going to always end this with the ethics behind it. Making sure that cybersecurity is, being thought of when you're doing AI, all that stuff. Like those are the two things: is ethics, and then making sure that we're safeguarding ourselves from being hacked.
Well, we certainly have a lot of news about that in the last couple of weeks, with the White House putting out a statement about it, and then the Bletchley convention that happened just this week here at Bletchley Park. 28 countries all getting together to put some governance around AI and put some guardrails around what it can and can't do. And I guess time will tell us if they got it right or not. But
I hope they consider small business, right? Like as a small business. So I hope, because I see all the large businesses getting together and doing their thing, doing what they do best, right? No, not knocking that, but I do think that there should be a space to hear about from the small business voice of how we can contribute, we can do things, we can, have a voice for the American public and so forth. I think that's also important because we miss a lot when only big business is involved,
No, 100%. I think there's a role for everybody. In this, and I encourage my teams on a regular basis, and we're working through how we create a safeguard so that employees can engage with these AI models in a safe way and not
Correct.
give away company secrets and not do something that's.
Yes.
But I encourage people to start to engage with these AIs in compelling ways. Just to think about communications, or just having someone as a peer review to kind of look over your shoulder and say, does what I'm saying make sense? Or, how often do you get that email and you stare at it and you're like, well, I'll put that back and I'll come back and look at it later. But you can actually, being able to take that email and saying, just what do I need to know? And what is important here? Like, sometimes you have these long threads, and what do I need to react to? Or is it really just someone that just had a lot of time in their hands and, wanted to spell it all out? And so I think there's lots of use cases that we're going to find that, the one I'm dreaming about is just letting an LLM loose on my inbox and let it manage it for me. Right? I mean, you think about it, right? You could really go back to the LLM and say, at the end of the week, instead of having a status meeting with my team, just give me a summary of everything that's worked on, right? And just let me know. Awesome. And let me know if anything's on fire. Let me know what's important. Let me know where we've made some progress. Let me know where we're not making progress. And just, there it is at the end of the week. And you're like, okay, great. Now we can address some specific pain points versus taking everyone's time to stop what they're doing. Give me a status report, right? I mean, no one wants that.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
I think, there's a question here about does Microsoft have an edge over AWS? And I think, so just to be clear, Microsoft did make a big investment in OpenAI. They invested $10 billion. They don't own it flat out, but they are a 49% share owner in OpenAI. And I think, Microsoft's advantage is that they're incorporating these technologies into tools and products we use every day. So Copilot's coming out, and they're being very open about how Copilot, there's been, for anyone that uses PowerPoint, there's been this sort of media designer that's been in.
I love it. Yes.
For a while, and that's using, some sort of machine learning AI. But we're going to see these things now on steroids or really sort of ramp up. Even Canva is doing AI, right, to integrate designs and brochures.
Figma too. Figma and Adobe.
Figma, and Miro, like all these companies are really jumping on the bandwagon to incorporate these capabilities into their products and suites. And so, Amazon doesn't really have a set of Office tools, but Amazon is now coming up quickly with something called Bedrock, which is a foundation, a place where you can run foundational models. You can run them independently, and you can run them safely for your business without having to, take on all the pain and cost with setting up your own ML ops and getting those teams up and running. So yeah, very cool.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I could do this for hours and just talk and learn and listen and share ideas and share information and all that other great stuff. So I appreciate it. Anything else you want to share?
No, I think that's it. I think reach out if people want to have another conversation, and maybe Melissa, let's think about having another follow-on conversation in a few weeks, and talk about this. I'm sure these topics are moving so quickly now that it feels like you have to constantly just be out there and learning from it, keep these conversations going in the forefront so that we can keep on track of things. My guess is that over time it'll settle down, but there's so much going on. It's important to be able to get out there and engage. So
keep connected to the network to understand how everything is related to each other and how we can continue to play a major part. So
yeah, very good.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining.
Great rest of your day. It's the end of the day here in the UK. So I'm going to sign off and have a great weekend. And thanks so much, everyone that joined us. It was really cool.
Thank you all. We appreciate it. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.